Welcome to the Loft online gathering. I am Pastor Molly Vetter, the senior pastor here at the Loft in Westwood Church, and it is good to be with you this morning on April 26th as we gather together in this virtual way. We're glad to welcome our regular Loft community who are used to gathering in person here in Westwood in Los Angeles. But we're also glad that this becomes available to anyone, anywhere who's logging on. So if this is your first time, we're glad you're with us and grateful that you've become a part of our virtual community. We are an inclusive community, a reconciling church, and intentionally inclusive of people who have been excluded and marginalized in the larger Christian community, including LGBTQ folks. We are glad to welcome a rich diversity that makes us a more beautiful community.
Hi, and I'm Josh Lopez Reyes, and I also want to invite you all to center yourselves and however you feel comfortable as we gather together online. I invite you to light a candle or to grab a warm drink, or as we talk about food, maybe even munch on something delicious as we connect and experience the divine through this online experience.
We are in the second week of a series we're calling Loft Cooks. It was inspired in part by our ecological commitments. And we began with inspiration from Michael Pollan's book and Netflix documentary called Cooked. It lays out in its 4 episodes or chapters elements that become an invitation to consideration of cooking as a way of engaging our relationship with the earth and our humanity. And we think it also connects to our life of faith, that cooking and sharing food are an important and foundational part about what it means to be Christian community together. And I am so grateful to all of the folks from our Loft community who are helping prepare this morning's worship. We've cooked up some great plans to share with you some thoughts that draw together connections between ecology and cuisine, between cooking and faith.
And so this week we'll focus on cooking with water and that miraculous divine act of, this very material element that is in all of our bodies, but is most of the world that we inhabit, and is also most of our food. And so this is going to be a really exciting, fun conversation, and we're so glad you joined us, and we want to invite you to participate. And so we'll have time for you to comment throughout the time, and really excited for how this will flow like water today.
Got nowhere to go, no one to see, no more business to get straight, no more trains or planes or buses, no more concerts or restaurants. Sure, this lifestyle has its blessings, but it still just don't feel natural. So we're sending chicken soup in a song. May you be cozy and warm wherever you are. Chicken soup in a song. May you be cozy and warm wherever you are. So many hours in a day, so many days in a week, weeks in a month, so much time to sit still and wait. We're on phones, emails, and Zoom calls. We're bi-coastal, international. Sure, this lifestyle has its pluses, but it still just don't feel natural. That's why we're sending you this chicken soup in a song. May you be cozy and warm wherever you are. Chicken soup in the song. May you be cozy and warm wherever you are.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I've always had a passion for cooking and baking from the time I was really young. From the time I was about 2 or 3, I loved to try new foods and I could remember the tastes. And by the time I was in 1st grade, my grandmother taught me the passion of cooking and how to work with flour. As I got older, I learned the family recipes and traditions that was passed on for generations. And I realized I've also inherited my grandma's love for grocery stores, for markets.
Next stop.
She loved picking the fresh produce. She loved the fish market, Chinatown. She loved buying food. At one point, she had 2 fridges just stuffed full, and it's just her joy to feed people. She slowed down a little bit, but she's still teaching her recipes. My grandmother lived through World War II. She was a refugee, and my mom was a baby boomer. And they are very aware of food waste. So they've taught me how to improvise. So if there's an extra of one kind of vegetable, I can put it in a dumpling or a soup. We've just learned to use every last bit and turn it into delicious meals.
来，你来干啊！
石头小的，
就是大理石的，
没有你做的好。
没关系。
你是从哪里学做这个？
这个是家庭里面学的，我外祖母家人包饺子，他就给我教的，给他擀皮儿。哎，你是最喜欢厨房做东西的。
嗯，对呀、
嗯，你比我还厉害，结果还能就喜欢做东西给人家吃。
嗯，对。
所以他谈到你给他做菜，他很幸福的。
My grandmother always said when you cook from scratch, you could use better ingredients, that you don't know what restaurants or pre-processed food put in your food. You could spend that money and choose your ingredients and the quality. And I want to pass that value on to my kids to really appreciate whole food and where it comes from. I love to cook around my kids. I want them to learn the value of food, of whole food, from the ground, from where the sources are, so that they grow up to appreciate that and learn to cook and learn to prepare food. It just is such a value in my family to know how to make food from scratch. Baby, you want some noodles? Food just brings you together. When you taste that food, it brings you back to that time of happiness and joy. So all of these traditions just bring so much comfort, especially in the time of quarantine.
this week I got to catch up with fellow lofter Sharon Witt again. You might remember last week we had a great conversation about cooking, especially in this time of quarantine, and trying to use what you have around you. As we reflect on Michael Pollan's book, this week, Water, Sharon actually taught me how to properly cook rice in water. It's actually kind of easy, but not really. It's kind of weird. Also, along with that, she taught me how to make an impromptu stir fry. We're going to have that entire segment up here very soon so that you can watch and enjoy and follow our discussion.
This is 2 Kings chapter 4, 38 through 41. When Elijah returned to Gilgal, there was a famine in the land. As the company of prophets was sitting before him, he said to his servant, "Put the large pot on and make some stew for the company of prophets." One of them went out into the field to gather herbs. He found a wild vine and gathered from it a lapful of wild gourds, came and cut them into the pot of stew, not knowing what they were. They served some for the men to eat. But while they were eating the stew, they cried out, "Oh man of God, there's death in the pot." They could not eat it. He said, "Then bring some flour." He threw it into the pot and said, "Serve the people and let them eat." And there was nothing harmful in the pot.
The scripture passage that we shared just now from the book of 2 Kings tells of one of the miraculous moments in the prophet Elisha's leadership. As the people, hungry, have made a stew out of gourds that they had gathered in the wild and discover that the stew they've made is poisonous. And so they call on Elisha, and he's able to add grain to the soup, and it becomes nourishing to the people. It's one of the stories that helps us see and understand and notice Elisha's authority and power as a leader and a prophet. But it's of the miracles that Elisha is a part of, the one most easily explainable by natural mechanisms. The transformation of cooking, the addition of this grain changes the makeup of the soup so that as it's taken into human bodies, the things that would have been poisonous become not so. It speaks of both the transformation possible in cooking and of God's work that is about bringing nourishment out of the world. I'm standing here at the sink today cleaning these strawberries that I bought at a farm stand on a little road adventure that we took on Monday, a little drive around town because we were going crazy staying in our house. I'm unable to resist boxes of strawberries at the roadside, and so I bought them, but now I'm afraid they're going to go bad, so I'm cutting them up so I can make them into a sauce or syrup or something. As I'm doing so, I'm standing at the kitchen sink cleaning strawberries at the kitchen window, and it makes me think of my grandmother Marie, who had a fantastic strawberry bed out in the yard, and who was so good at transforming common ingredients into nourishing meals. The possibility of transformation that comes in cooking is one way of engaging how it is that God works in the world for transformation, for offering nourishment, for feeding us in literal and spiritual ways. As I think about what it means to be people who respond to God's work in the world, tending toward the flourishing of life and the delight in the world, I think of how difficult it is to describe that in a way that leaves us not alone as individuals, but that honors our collective belonging together in God. And it makes me especially grateful for the work of theologians like Sally McFaig, whose pioneering work in ecological and feminist theology helps give us ways and words to understand how it is that we belong together in God. McFaig's early work helped us name how it is that all theology uses metaphor to describe God, because all of it is putting words on something that's essentially beyond the literal description of words. And so in her theology, she pushes back against some of the common metaphors we use that we just take for granted for understanding who God is and who we are and who the church is. And one of her models that she proposes for understanding who God is that she suggests we use the earth as a way of imagining and understanding and thinking about the body of God. If we understand the earth as the body of God, it helps us understand and appreciate our participating together in a system that's bigger than us, that connects us together in a real and powerful way that that it's dangerous to minimize. It also helps us envision how it is that we belong together in a way that makes our diversities a gift. In the same way that ecosystems benefit from biodiversity, our belonging in God is enriched because of our difference and particularity. But there's also in her theology an invitation to be careful in considering how it is that we participate in the whole of that system, to remember and recognize the danger of seeing ourselves individualistically, the temptation of greed that isolates us from one another. If the earth is the body of God, then our work in appreciating and tending to the flourishing of life for all is holy work. And we're invited in Christ's offering of love to see an invitation to behave in similar self-sacrificial ways, especially in solidarity with the poor and the marginalized, for the sake of the flourishing of the whole. In McFaig's theology, the invitation is to participate in and enjoy life abundant by gift of God's good grace, but to recognize that the most abundant life is accessible not when we isolate ourselves from one another, but when we share together in a wondrous whole. And so we who live with privilege might be frequently called to limit our own capacity to consume for the sake of the flourishing of other life elsewhere in the world. In the same way that Christ's love is shared so fully in self-limiting, self-sacrificial love on the cross, and it brings him to new life, our freely chosen sacrifice of the old ways of seeing ourselves in isolation invites and enables us to participate in a flourishing of abundant life that is available not to us as individuals, but to us as a interconnected whole. It's a theology that connects us to one another. And so the image of Elisha's soup becomes one very small and tangible way to talk about what this looks like. And it's in using our lives to aid in transformation that is nourishment for everyone, for even all creation.
This morning's scripture is Psalms 34, 4 through 8. I prayed to the Lord, and they answered me. She freed me from all my fears. Those who look to them for help will be radiant with joy. No shadow of shame will darken their faces. In my desperation I prayed, and the Lord listened. She saved me from all my troubles, for the angels of the Lord is a guard. They surround it and defend all who fear them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in them.
Taste and see that the Lord is good. That's what the psalmist says. It's got to be a metaphor, right? We can't literally taste God. Well, I want to unpack this idea a little bit and talk about this idea of taste. Philosophers talk about this idea of bodily knowledge, meaning that we know not just with our intellect, but we actually know things with our body, our whole body. For example, as somebody is cooking or baking bread, they knead the dough and they know that the dough is ready with their hands. Or say you're cooking a pie, you can actually know when that pie is ready by smelling with your nose. These are bodily acts. And last week we talked about this idea of theology as alimentation, and I first heard about this idea through a book by Angel Mendez Montoya called The Theology of Food. And he makes this interesting connection between the communion table and our knowledge of God's love. And he notes that the words in Spanish, saber and sabor, which only have one letter difference, saber, S-A-B-E-R, and sabor, S-A-B-O-R, come from the same Latin root, which mean to know or to taste or to savor. And he makes this connection, saying that we actually know the love of God through our taste buds, through the acts of tasting. And so why are you spending these weeks talking about food and cooking and theology and our spirituality? I believe it is a great spiritual matter, an endeavor that we are all invited to partake in. And so this idea of cooking with water that we're exploring this week, we see that there's this great transformation that happens. Foods that were once unsavourable and poisonous are transformed into foods that give us delight and nourishment, and they are medicinal. And we saw that in the episode on water in Michael Pollan's documentary Cooked. It talks a lot about these foods that once were not able to be digested by the human body, through cooking them in water and boiling them, they become something that are nourishable and life-giving. And something that he also notes in his book that focuses on this idea of cooking with water is this idea of exo cuisine and Indo cuisine. That is, the exo cuisine is this cooking outside. And so we saw that last week that talked about cooking with fire, oftentimes where meats or vegetables or plants are cooked outside with fire. But there's also this Indo cuisine where food is cooked inside, and he focuses on food cooked in a pot, boiled in water, and how that is another way of bringing nourishment and delight in feeding others. Is this not related to our discipleship, to our spirituality? That is both inward and outward. See, we are invited to partake in the grace of God, to let it seep down into our very beings, to every fiber of our beings, into our psyche, into our hearts, into our minds. But as we are filled with this grace and as we know this love, we are gifted to share this with the world around us. See, our discipleship, our spirituality is also not only inward, but it is also outward. And I believe that there's this deep connection between this idea of feeding and cooking that is related to this idea of sharing the love of God. And so we've talked about that a little bit through this idea of how there are different ways to feed. And something that really struck me in this chapter on the series with Michael Pollan is this idea of cooking that allows us to look outward. It allows us to look at our community, to our loved ones around us, but it also invites us to look at nature and to look at the plants and the animals that feed us and give us life in God's creation. And I believe that it is all connected. And so why are we spending so much time talking about this? Because these things are important and they are part of our spirituality, and they are the delight and the nourishment that bring us life. And the fun thing is that this is not just individual matter, but it's always a communal, it's always a familial matter. And so during this time that we are staying home and having to cook and to be fed by either our loved ones or by people on the front lines cooking food for us, let us taste and see the divine nature in this act of cooking and feeding and food.
One of the oldest prayers in our tradition is the Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. It follows the very simple but powerful repetition of the following 3 lines: Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. The English word for mercy is a translation of the Greek word eleos. This word has the same etymological root as the old Greek word for oil, or more precisely, olive oil, a substance which was used extensively as a soothing agent for bruises and minor wounds. The oil was poured onto the wound and gently massaged in, thus soothing, comforting, and healing the injured part of one's body. To pray, Lord have mercy, is thus to say, Lord, soothe us, comfort us,
take away our pain. Show us your infinite loving kindness. It is to ask for God's steadfast love to heal the wounds in our hurting world. This morning, we want to invite the community to share concerns, petitions, and lamentations for which our world needs God's mercy, thinking about water. Please name prayers where you are, or type them in the comment section of this video during this time. For communities in this country and around the world who are thirsty for justice due to preventable contaminated waters, Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. For other living creatures and for the earth itself that is dying due to poisonous chemicals in our waters or droughts caused by climate change, Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. For people experiencing homelessness in our community who do not have access to drinking water, nor water to take a shower, Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Amen.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4.
You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep. My faith will stand, and I will call upon your name, and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours. You are mine. Your grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign hand will be my guide. Where feet may fail and fear surrounds me, you never failed, and you won't stop now. And I will call upon your name, and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans
excited to have Jeff Arnold here, who Jeff and your lovely wife, Allison, have been a longtime member of the Westwood community and from the beginning of the Loft community. And you've also spent decades in the restaurant business and now own your own restaurants in the LA area. And I thought that while we're having these conversations about food and faith, and also this week specifically focusing on the beauty of feeding, I thought it would be really interesting for you to share a little bit about your business, especially because you mentioned the other day this quote that you told me that you're really keeping the restaurants open more so for your workers than just for the sake of your business. And so can you share a little bit more about what's going on and give us an inside peek of, what restaurants are doing during this time of COVID?
Yeah, restaurants they're trying to adapt. They're looking at a different business model, different revenue picture, and trying to figure out how they can optimize that. Obviously, restaurants that did a lot of off-premise carry-out delivery business have an advantage over those that relied solely on their dining rooms. So we have traditionally done quite a bit of carry-out and delivery business. We don't have a drive-through, but we've added a makeshift drive-through. I call it a redneck drive-through to my Sherman Oaks location with a canopy out in the parking lot, the way they have them at farmers markets, and run power and Ethernet cables out there to have the cash registers and the point of sale system on there. And customers come in, they order, and they're told to go park in a space that has a number on it, and then we run the food out to them. And it's been a pretty successful adaptation to the market. But yeah, we had to look at this and say, do we close or do we stay open? I mean, that was the first big decision to make. And we realized it's pretty expensive to close because there's still a lot of costs. The landlords are still going to want rent. I mean, that's going to be negotiated, but they're still going to sure want it. And they've got a lease agreement that says you have to pay them. And utilities and, things like trash collection and phones and, your TVs, all that stuff, costs you money. It's hard to turn everything off and turn it back on. So there's ongoing costs. We estimated that it would be a little more expensive to stay open because of the, 60-70% drop in sales. I was telling Josh it's a little more expensive than we thought to stay open, but still worth it. The reason that it's worth it is what you alluded to. In most businesses, and especially in a food service business like this, which really comes down to the customer experience, and the employees and the people in the front line are the ones that you got to rely on to make the magic happen. And so it's always about the people, and you got to make sure that those people know that you got their back. And so if it's a little more expensive, it's the right thing to do morally, and it's win-win, because if it's good for the employees, it's good for us. So we have kept the restaurants open, and we're going to keep looking for ways to try to do a little better job on the top line so that the losses are less. And we're getting hopefully, touch wood, we're going to get the money from the government for the PPP loans and use that to sustain us for another couple of months. And hopefully we get back to normal, or something that approaches normal.
Wish you all the best, and thank you so much for sharing a little bit about the behind the scenes during this time.
Glad to do it.
Yeah,
I'll show you my shirt here at the end. Keep calm and carry out. It's the new business model for restaurants. So yeah, support your local restaurants.
Good morning, Loft family. My name is Grecia Lopez Reyes, and today I want to share some food for thought with you all. There are two major issues in our cities today: food waste and food insecurity. Food waste is the largest source of waste in U.S. landfills, surpassing both paper and plastic. Did you know that the U.S. is the global leader in food waste? We throw away more than 80 billion pounds of food each year, and this is equivalent to 1,000 Empire State Buildings. According to the World Wildlife Federation, the production of wasted food in the U.S. is equivalent to the greenhouse emissions of 37 million cars. Why do we waste so much food? 80% of Americans throw perfectly good food simply because we misunderstand the expiration label. We are also impulsive buyers. We buy more than we actually need. We underutilize leftovers and toss food scraps that can actually be consumed or composted. Restaurants and grocery stores are also big contributors of food waste. Stores overstock and toss ugly produce before they even hit the shelves because they fear that people will not buy produce that is not shiny or that is not in perfect shape. At the same time, many families do not have access to good, nutritious food due to the cost of food, neighborhoods where they live, and other factors. Certain communities face more challenges than others as a result of segregation, redlining, economic injustice, and other discriminatory policies. LA County is home to the largest population of food insecure people in the nation. Nearly 30% of low-income individuals in LA County struggle with food insecurity, not knowing where their next meal will come from. And we know that the numbers have probably skyrocketed now with the COVID-19 crisis and with the high rates of unemployment. Food insecurity refers to a lack of access to enough food, to good, healthy food, and culturally appropriate food. It means that you or your family are worried about paying for groceries, when the next meal will come, or having to choose between buying food and paying bills. Growing up, my family experienced food insecurity, but my mom did a great job in not letting us know that we were food insecure. I grew up using food stamps, not knowing what they really were, and I also grew up waking up at 5 in the morning to arrive to my elementary school at 6 a.m. so that I could volunteer in the cafeteria and get my free meal for the day. Many Black and Brown communities do not have a single grocery store, limiting the access to fresh and healthy foods. The people living in these areas either have to travel to long distances to purchase fresh food or may rely only on fast food restaurants or convenience stores because that's the only option they have. The lack of access to healthy food is an injustice. Supermarket chains like Trader Joe's avoid low-income areas for many reasons. Often they anticipate that residents cannot afford to purchase their products, or that residents do not have the education to understand the importance of healthy eating. And there are supermarkets available in some communities, but oftentimes these stores may have higher food prices and lower food quality. However, there are many organizations that have come together to address the massive problems of food waste and food insecurity. For example, I work for LA Alliance for a New Economy Lane, and through our Don't Waste LA coalition, we were able to bring together the Food Policy Council, St. Francis Center, Food Finders, and various other orgs to help us strategize around food waste prevention, food recovery, food donation, and composting. Through the Don't Waste LA coalition and the leadership of the Food Policy Council, we were instrumental in developing the city's first food recovery program. This was done through the Recicla program, which is the City of LA's newest waste collection program. Since the inception of Recicla, we were able to rescue 5 million pounds of fresh produce that would have gone to a landfill, but instead went to shelters, food pantries, and food banks. Lastly, I would like to share with you an infographic that has 9 easy steps on how to avoid food waste. I will add this infographic in the comment section, so please make sure that you check it out and also share how you avoid food waste and what are some practical steps. Thank you.
Travel these wide roads for so long. My heart's been far from you. 10,000 miles gone. Oh, I wanna come near and give you every part of me, but there's blood on my hands and my lips aren't clean. In my darkness I remember Mama's words reoccur to me. Surrender to the good Lord and He'll wipe your slate clean. Take me to your river, I wanna Dip me in your smooth waters. I go in as a man with many crimes come up for air as my sins flow down the Jordan. Oh, I wanna come here and give you every part of me, but there's blood on my hands and my lips unclean. Take me to your river. I wanna go. Go on, take me to your river. I wanna know. Wanna know. I wanna go. I wanna go. I wanna know. Take me to your river. I wanna go. Go on, take me to your river. I wanna know. Take me to your river. I wanna go. Lord, please let me know. Take me to your river. I wanna know.
Thanks for your thoughts on food, Josh. It's a joy to be a part of all of these cool people from our community sharing about life and cooking and faith. In some of what you said, it really connected to me with this moment in the season of Easter, your connection between tasting and knowing, or tasting and seeing and understanding, I feel like is so vivid. It reminded me immediately of that story of Jesus appearing after resurrection on the road to Emmaus with two disciples, and they walk and they're not able to recognize that it's Jesus the whole walk until they sit down at the end of the day and they sit at table together, and it says that Jesus takes bread, blesses it, breaks it, and gives it, and then they recognize that it's him. That I guess it wasn't literally tasting, but it's in that act of receiving and blessing and sharing food that they're able to recognize who Jesus is. The risen Christ's identity is clear to disciples when they share food, and the power of sharing food as being a centerpiece of our Christian story. I feel like often we've made it kind of a sacramental, religious act that's isolated to our sharing at the communion table, but foundational to identity as Christians from the very beginning of Christian communities is that it was a people who broke bread together, who shared food. And this taking, blessing, breaking, and sharing that is in the Emmaus story immediately makes me think of the Last Supper, because it's those same words used as Jesus sits with the disciples. But it's also the same set of words that he uses on a hillside with a crowd of people who are hungry when he has just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and he takes and blesses and breaks and shares them. And in that moment, it's even more powerfully clear that the work of discipleship is connected to sharing food, because it's not just Jesus doing it with 1 loaf for 12 people, but it's Jesus and these disciples doing it with these 5 loaves and 2 fish that miraculously multiply. And then the disciples become the ones who clearly have a role immediately in sharing this multiplied food, so that discipleship from that moment is about sharing food.
Yeah, thanks so much. That that divine act of breaking bread, right? I think it's so important in our tradition. And so that's why, of course, we're inviting folks to reflect on this during these weeks, and was really inspired by, some of the folks in our community who we got to hear from today, like Jeff, talking about this act of, running a restaurant business during this time of, when people are hungry and, people are hurting economically because so many jobs have been lost. I see that as an act of feeding. I see that as this divine call, right, of continuing to feed the hungry in our community. Both the workers who are working there, but also the people that are needing food. And we also realize that we're talking about food and cooking during this time, but not everybody has the ability to cook, and so that's very important to have access to food. And it also reminds me of this idea that Sharon alluded to a little bit about not wasting, and Brian also alluded to it with these Java logs last week. And I think so. It's a human act, but there are also ecological implications that that we reflected on earlier with Grecia too. And I think it is just a reminder that food matters, but that feeding matters. And there's always this divine act, because in the act of feeding, it speaks to a larger desire that we have as humans about hunger and about being connected. And I think that's the beauty of this invitation, that we all have to reflect on the things that give us life, and the people and the other parts of creation that were a part of that act. And we live in a fast-paced world. It's hard to do, but this is the invitation during this time for all of us to remember.
Yeah, and all these things like food participate in our faith, and they function both as metaphors for something else, right? So food represents also to us like spiritual nourishment, but it also matters that it's an actual material thing. I mean, for me, this is the great gift of our Christian faith, is that it's spiritual, but it's also material, that Christ is incarnate, not just a divine being in another realm, but Christ is like earthly, and it's an affirmation of God's valuing of this world, so that we see as holy this world around us. And it matters that we have food to eat, and it matters that we give thanks to God for it, and it matters that we share it with people who are hungry, and it matters how we treat the food that we have, how we receive it as gift, and how we don't waste it. I was inspired by the connection that you just named between Grecia's piece about food waste in our Los Angeles community and the tender beauty of Sharon's piece about her grandmother, who also had this value of not wasting food, born out of her own life story of having survived as a refugee, having known how precious food can be when you've been hungry, but also how that same food is not just about like maintaining life so that you don't starve, that it's also a source of like life and story and history and like the abundant life that's something more than we can quantify or like sell or measure, but is like something vital and powerful that makes a difference. Sharon's piece was especially touching to me today, her memories of her grandmother, because they invoked in me memories that I have of my grandmother, of cooking, of food that I've shared with loved ones in different places and times. And that act of memory is also central to our religious life, to our sacramental life at the communion table, where Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me." And that memory becomes not only an intellectual recall of the story of Christ, but like a representation, a reparticipation, a reimagining forward that's embodying the gift of grace for us now and for the world, for the rest of the world, expansively, not individualistically. But that the power of food to evoke memory is really strong. I'm totally not an expert in this, but smells and food, taste, so immediately connect me to like moments and places and people in a super powerful way. And it's been a joy to be occasioned to have some of those experiences this week.
Yes, and thank you so much again for that reminder. No pun intended. But really, this is the amazing thing about food, that it does evoke these memories. And so, in the spirit of our conversational community, we want to invite you all to share a memory of food, or maybe a loved one, or a recipe that you have. We all have stories connected to food. None of us are here without food and the loved ones that help bring that food into our bellies. And so we invite you now to, in a couple of lines, share a memory that you have about food.
And this would be a great invitation for the week too. Maybe not just sharing it now, but maybe this week there's some way that you can taste or remember or make or bake or cook that dish, or something connected to it, or just cook something with water that evokes a sense of the gift of grace, our God who doesn't count anything as waste, but redeems the lost bits together so that they might give nourishment. You can always post on Instagram and tag it #LoftCooks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wesley. I have your announcements this morning. First of all, I just want to say thank you for joining us as we all try to figure out what it means to be a church community in this time of pandemic. A few new things happening in the Life of our community. We have a new group starting up. It's being led by Reagan Williams and Becca Brannon. They'll be talking about prayer. That group is happening on Wednesdays at 7:30. The POC Theology group has a new book. They will be reading through Burying White Privilege, Resurrecting a Badass Christianity. You can find information about those at the Loft.LA/response. And if you're still not getting our email, make sure you do that by going to the Loft.LA/sign-up so that you can be informed of all the things that are happening in our community. If you're able, we encourage everyone to donate if they can by going to our website and going to the Giving tab. It's what makes Westwood UMC and the Loft possible. We have 2 more Sundays of the Loft Cook series. This next Sunday we'll be going through, or using at least as a jumping off point, episode 3, Air, of Michael Pollan's book/documentary Cooked. And lastly, I just want to encourage everyone to join us for conversation after this live stream on Zoom. You can find that information in your email or at the response page for the Loft. Have a good day, everyone.
As this Loft gathering comes to a close, we invite you to be people who taste and know.
And we also invite you to cook and remember this divine act of grace throughout the week. Go in peace. Amen.